I'm Morgan Reynolds, 32, a senior automotive engineer at Detroit Motors. 10 years ago, I walked away from my wealthy stepfamily and built my own life in the motor industry. Last month, I reluctantly flew home for my half-brother Jake's wedding, thinking we could all be adults for one weekend. I never expected his wedding would become the battlefield where years of family tension would explode around a $600 million merger deal. Looking back, I should have known better than to help set those tables. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe to join me for more stories about standing your ground when it matters most. I grew up in a small town outside Detroit, raised by my dad, Frank Reynolds, who owned Reynolds Auto Shop. My earliest memories are of sitting on a stool in his garage, watching him work, the smell of motor oil and metal permanently embedded in my senses. By 12, I could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. Dad called me his little engineer and taught me everything he knew about cars. He was so proud when I took apart and rebuilt my first transmission at 14. We were never rich, but we were happy in our little two-bedroom house. Mom had left when I was 3, something about needing to find herself. She'd send birthday cards sporadically, but Dad was my world. He worked 12-hour days to make sure I had everything I needed, especially after I showed interest in science and mathematics. "Your brain's gonna take you places my hands never could," he'd say. Then, when I was 16, Dad had a massive heart attack at the shop. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Just like that, I lost my father, my mentor, and my security. I was devastated but had no time to fully grieve. The shop was in debt, and I had bills to pay. So I convinced the courts to grant me special working papers and took over managing the shop while finishing high school. The regular customers trusted me because they'd seen me work alongside Dad for years. 2 years later, my absent mother, Diane, reappeared in my life, married to Richard Bradford, CEO of Bradford Industries, a major automotive parts supplier worth billions. Suddenly, my mother was living in a mansion, wearing designer clothes and acting like she'd always been part of high society. She wanted me to join this new family, sell Dad's shop, and move into their estate in Bloomfield Hills. "You could attend any college you want, Morgan. Richard would pay for everything," she'd promised. But Richard Bradford came with his own children. Jake, 2 years younger than me, who was being groomed to take over the company someday, and Amanda, his princess, the same age as me but with every advantage I'd never had. From our first meeting, it was clear that neither welcomed an interloper from their father's new wife's previous life. Victoria Bradford, Richard's ex-wife and mother to Jake and Amanda, maintained significant influence in their lives and the company despite the divorce. She held a position as Chief Strategy Officer at Bradford Industries and lived in a separate wing of the estate. The arrangement was bizarre to me, but apparently common in wealthy circles where business interests trump personal feelings. Victoria took one look at my work boots and calloused hands and decided I didn't belong. "Diane, darling, perhaps we should arrange for Morgan to see my stylist," she'd suggested during our first dinner together, not even addressing me directly. "Those nails have seen better days." I never moved into their estate. Instead, I sold Dad's shop and used every penny to put myself through engineering school at Michigan Tech. I refused Richard's offers of financial help or company internships. I wanted to make it on my own merits, not family connections. For years of scholarships, student loans, and part-time work later, I graduated with honors and landed a job at Detroit Motors, one of the largest automotive manufacturers in the country. Over the next decade, I worked my way up from junior designer to senior engineer, specializing in powertrain systems. I developed 2 patented engine efficiency technologies and led a team designing electric vehicle platforms. My career flourished, but my relationship with the Bradford family withered. I'd see my mother a few times a year, usually meeting for lunch halfway between my apartment in Detroit and their estate. She'd spend most of our time together talking about Jake's accomplishments at Bradford Industries or Amanda's social connections. She rarely asked about my work, and when I tried to explain my projects, her eyes would glaze over. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, then change the subject to the latest Bradford charity gala. As for Richard, Amanda, and Jake, I barely saw them. Richard would send generic birthday cards with hefty checks I never cashed. Amanda didn't bother acknowledging my existence unless forced to at the rare family gathering I attended. Jake was slightly more cordial, occasionally sending an email when he had a technical question he thought I might answer. Victoria remained the gatekeeper of the Bradford family, and it was clear she considered me an unfortunate reminder of Richard's wife's common past. To her, I would always be the grease monkey who didn't know her place. So when the invitation to Jake's wedding arrived, I almost threw it away. Jake was marrying Claire Winston, daughter of a prominent land developer. I hadn't even known he was engaged, but my mother called, begging me to attend. "Please, Morgan. It would mean so much to me to have both my children at the wedding," she pleaded. "Jake specifically asked for you to be there." That surprised me enough to reconsider. Maybe Jake had matured. Maybe after 10 years, I could spend one weekend with the Bradfords without feeling like an outsider. I requested time off work, booked a flight, and packed my best dress. Looking back, I was naive to think anything would have changed. The Bradford estate hadn't changed in the decade since I'd last visited. The sprawling mansion still dominated the hillside, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and gardens. My Uber driver whistled as we approached the gate. "Some people really live like this, huh?" he said, pulling up to the entrance. "They sure do," I replied, tipping him generously before retrieving my modest suitcase. A uniformed staff member appeared as if from nowhere, reaching for my bag. "I've got it, thanks," I said, slinging my duffel over my shoulder. I'd packed light, planning to stay only for the mandatory 3 days of wedding festivities. Victoria was the first person I encountered in the grand foyer, directing staff about flower arrangements. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple travel outfit of jeans and a button-down shirt. "Morgan, you arrived." Not a question, not a welcome. Just a statement of fact. "Diane mentioned you'd be joining us. Gerald will show you to your room." No hug, no "how was your flight?" no "thanks for coming." Just immediate dismissal. "Nice to see you too, Victoria," I replied, forcing a smile. She turned to the nearest staff member. "The East Wing guest room. The blue one." Then she was back to her flowers, conversation over. The blue room turned out to be the smallest guest room, tucked away in the farthest corner of the East Wing, practically in another zip code from the family bedrooms. The message was clear. I might be allowed to attend, but I wasn't really family. I was unpacking when my mother knocked tentatively on the door. "Morgan, honey, you made it." She hugged me tightly, smelling of expensive perfume and anxiety. "How was your flight? You look thin. Are you eating enough?" "The flight was fine, Mom. And yes, I eat just fine on my engineer's salary," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "How are you?" "Oh, busy. This wedding has been such a production." Victoria has been an absolute saint, handling so many details. "Did you see the floral arrangements? $20,000 just for flowers. Can you imagine?" I couldn't, actually. $20,000 was what I'd paid to fix the roof on my house last year. "Where's Jake?" "I'd like to congratulate him," I asked. "Oh, he's in meetings with Richard and the Westlake people. Did you hear about the merger? Bradford Industries is merging with Westlake Corporation right after the wedding. $600 million deal. Richard says it's going to revolutionize the automotive supplier industry." I had heard rumors about the merger at work. Westlake was known for aggressive acquisition tactics and cutting corners on quality. Meetings during his wedding weekend? That seems intense. Mom waved dismissively. "Business doesn't stop for personal events, Morgan. You know that." "Oh!" "I need to check on the welcome bags for the guests. Dinner's at 7 in the main dining room." business casual. And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind the familiar feeling that I was an afterthought in her new life. I spent the afternoon reacquainting myself with the estate, nodding politely to staff who didn't recognize me and avoiding the busy areas where I might encounter Victoria or Amanda. Around 4, I ventured to the back terrace, hoping for some quiet time before dinner. Instead, I found myself within earshot of a heated business discussion. Richard, Jake, and 2 men in expensive suits were huddled around outdoor furniture, documents spread across the table. "The Winston land is the key," one of the suits was saying. "Without that property for the new facility, the entire manufacturing platform collapses." "Don't worry about the land," Jake replied confidently. "Claire's father has already agreed in principle. The wedding is just formalizing family ties before business ones." I felt a twist in my stomach. Was Jake marrying for love or for a business deal? "And the safety concerns with the e-drive system?" the other suit asked. Richard waved dismissively. "Minor engineering challenges. Nothing that will delay production timelines. Our technical team has it under control." As an engineer specializing in powertrain systems, my ears perked up. E-Drive was a new electric vehicle platform I'd heard about, but the technical specifications were closely guarded. If there were safety concerns... Well, if it isn't my long-lost stepsister, Amanda's voice cut through my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, martini in hand, looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. "Spying on business meetings now?" "Just getting some air," I replied, stepping away from the terrace. "Good to see you, Amanda." "Wish I could say the same," she smirked. "Still fixing cars in Detroit?" "I'm a senior engineer at Detroit Motors. I design powertrain systems." "Right. Once a mechanic, always a mechanic." She sipped her drink. "Mom's looking for you, by the way. Something about seating arrangements." I highly doubted Victoria was looking for me for anything, but I took the hint and walked away. Dinner that night was excruciating. Seated at the far end of the table, away from the immediate family, I watched as Jake finally made an appearance, looking tired but excited. His fiancée Claire wasn't present, apparently having dinner with her own family. "Morgan, you made it," Jake called down the table, the first genuine welcome I'd received. "Thanks for coming. Claire's excited to meet you." Before I could respond, Victoria cut in. "Jake, darling, tell everyone about the Westlake presentation. Robert was so impressed with your projections." And just like that, the conversation shifted to business. I picked at my meal as Richard, Jake, and Victoria discussed merger details, market projections, and expansion plans. My mother occasionally glanced my way apologetically, but remained silent beside Richard. "What about the technical specifications for the new e-drive system?" I finally asked during a lull. "I've heard there might be some safety concerns." The table went silent. Richard stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "Where did you hear that?" he asked sharply. "Industry talk," I replied smoothly. "I do work for a major automotive manufacturer." Victoria laughed, a brittle sound. "Morgan, darling, these are complex business matters. Perhaps stick to what you know best." "Like fixing cars?" I suggested, meeting her gaze. "Exactly," she smiled, missing or ignoring my sarcasm. "Now, Jake, about the rehearsal dinner tomorrow." The conversation moved on, my question brushed aside. But I didn't miss the concerned look Jake and Richard exchanged. Something about that e-drive system wasn't right, and they knew it. Later, as I was heading back to my isolated blue room, I overheard Victoria speaking to my mother in the hallway. "Really, Diane, I don't know why you insisted she come. She's completely out of place here. Did you see her asking about technical specifications at dinner? So inappropriate." "She's my daughter, Victoria," my mother replied, but her voice was weak. "And she is an engineer. She understands these things. She fixes cars," Victoria dismissed. "This is a multi-million-dollar corporate merger. There's a difference." I slipped away before they could see me, my resolve hardening. I might just be the mechanic to them, but I knew more about automotive engineering than anyone in that house. And something told me that knowledge might be more valuable than they realized. The next morning, I woke early to the sounds of increased activity throughout the estate. The wedding was still a day away, but the rehearsal dinner was that evening and final preparations were in full swing. Rather than hide in my room, I decided to make myself useful. If nothing else, helping with setup would give me something to do besides awkward family interactions. I found the event coordinator, an overworked woman named Patty, in the garden marquee, surrounded by staff and looking frazzled. Need an extra pair of hands? I offered. She looked me up and down. Your family, right? Ms. Bradford said family wouldn't be helping with setup. I'm Morgan Reynolds, the bride's stepsister. And I'm happy to help. Relief washed over her face. Thank God. We're short 3 staff members who called in sick. Can you handle table arrangements? For the next few hours, I worked alongside the catering staff, arranging tables, placing centerpieces, and folding napkins into elaborate shapes. The physical work felt good after the tension of the previous evening. Several times, staff members asked if I was a professional event planner, impressed by my efficiency and attention to detail. Engineer, I'd reply with a smile. I just like things to function properly. Around noon, I was checking the stability of a particularly wobbly table when a young woman approached me. Excuse me, do you know where I can find more of these place cards? We seem to be short a few. I looked up to find myself face to face with a pretty blonde woman who looked anxious, but friendly. Sorry, I'm just helping out. You might want to ask Patty, the coordinator. Oh! I thought you were part of the event staff. She looked embarrassed. I'm Claire, by the way. Jake's fiancée. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans. Morgan Reynolds. Jake's stepsister. Her eyes widened. Morgan. I've been hoping to meet you. Jake's told me so much about you. That surprised me. He has? Of course. He says you're the smartest person in the family. A brilliant engineer who wouldn't let anyone hand her success. Claire smiled genuinely. I've been nervous about meeting everyone, to be honest. The Bradfords are intimidating. Tell me about it, I laughed. And I'm only an honorary Bradford at best. Would you like to grab lunch? I could use a break from all this wedding madness. We found a quiet spot in the kitchen garden, away from the bustle, and shared sandwiches prepared by the house chef. Claire turned out to be surprisingly down-to-earth for someone marrying into the Bradford fortune. My family has money, she explained, but nothing like this. Dad developed some successful properties in Michigan, but we still fly commercial and do our own grocery shopping. How did you meet Jake? I asked, curious about what had drawn her to my status-conscious stepbrother. At a charity fundraiser. I was there representing my father's foundation, and Jake was different than I expected. Kinder. More thoughtful than most men in his position. Her expression softened. When we're alone, away from all this, he's just Jake. Not the Bradford heir. I found myself warming to Claire. So the wedding planning has been intense, I take it? Overwhelming, she admitted. Victoria has opinions about everything, from my dress to the champagne brand. Sometimes I feel like I'm just a prop in the Bradford family production. That sounds familiar, I said. I've always felt like an unwanted extra in their perfect family portrait. Claire hesitated, then spoke quietly. Can I tell you something in confidence? I nodded. I'm not entirely comfortable with how intertwined this wedding is with the business merger. My father's land is part of the deal, and sometimes it feels like I don't know, part of the transaction. Have you talked to Jake about this? I've tried, but he insists it's just good timing. The merger has been in works for months, and the wedding date was set before final negotiations. She sighed. Maybe I'm being oversensitive. Before I could respond, we heard Victoria's voice approaching. Claire immediately straightened, her demeanor shifting to polite deference. Victoria rounded the corner with three elegantly dressed women, clearly old friends from her social circle. She stopped short when she saw us. "Claire, there you are. We've been looking everywhere. The florist needs final approval on your bouquet." Her gaze slid dismissively over me. "I see you've met Morgan." "Yes, we were just having lunch and getting acquainted," Claire replied. One of Victoria's friends peered at me curiously. "Is this your wedding planner, Victoria?" "She's done a marvelous job with the table arrangements." Victoria's smile tightened. "No, Judith. This is Diane's daughter from her first marriage. Morgan works with cars in Detroit." "I'm an automotive engineer," I corrected. "Senior powertrain systems developer at Detroit Motors." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Don't mind her, she's just the mechanic. We keep her around for when things break." Her friends tittered with laughter. I saw my mother, who had just joined the group, wince visibly but remain silent. Claire looked mortified. The casual cruelty of Victoria's words hit me like a physical blow. 10 years of professional accomplishments, my patents, my team leadership position, all reduced to just the mechanic with a few dismissive words. "If you'll excuse me," I said, standing up. "I should get back to the setup." "Oh, don't trouble yourself," Victoria replied. "We've hired professionals for that. Claire, come along now. We have decisions to make." As they walked away, I heard Victoria murmuring to her friends, no sense of social graces. "You can take the girl out of the garage." I stood there, humiliation burning through me, until Claire glanced back apologetically before being swept away. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes as she followed Victoria's entourage. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt crystallized into resolve. I was done trying to fit into their world or earn their respect. I was Morgan Reynolds, automotive engineer, my father's daughter. And if they wanted to dismiss me as just the mechanic, they were about to learn how dangerous it could be to underestimate someone who understood how things worked. After the humiliating encounter with Victoria and her friends, I retreated to my room, fighting back tears of anger and frustration. For a few minutes, I seriously considered packing my bag and catching the next flight back to Detroit. What was I even doing here? Clearly, a decade of professional accomplishments meant nothing to these people. But leaving felt too much like letting Victoria win. I was here for Jake's wedding, not for Victoria's approval. I would stay, maintain my dignity, and then return to my real life where I was respected for my abilities. I decided to find the wedding itinerary to see what events I was obligated to attend and what I could reasonably skip. Mom had mentioned something about a folder of information in the family study, so I made my way there, hoping to avoid running into anyone. The Bradford family study was an impressive room lined with leather-bound books that probably never got read and expensive art selected by interior decorators. I located a stack of wedding folders on the desk, each labeled with a guest's name. Mine was at the bottom, of course. As I reached for it, I noticed a partially open laptop and several folders marked Confidential, Westlake Merger, Final Specifications. Next to them lay technical drawings of what appeared to be a new electric vehicle platform, the eDrive system I'd heard mentioned. I hesitated. These were clearly private business documents. But my engineering curiosity got the better of me, especially after hearing about potential safety concerns. I glanced at the door, then quickly leafed through the technical specifications. What I saw made my blood run cold. The eDrive system had a fundamental design flaw in its battery cooling system. Under certain conditions, particularly rapid charging followed by high-speed operation, the batteries could overheat catastrophically. We're talking potential fires, explosions, and serious injuries or deaths. Worse, it appeared Bradford Industries was aware of the problem. Notes in the margins indicated post-merger optimization required and defer redesign to Q3 next year. They were planning to finalize the merger with these known flaws and deal with them later, potentially after production had already begun. As an engineer, I was appalled. This wasn't a minor issue that could be fixed with a software update. This was a fundamental architectural flaw that required a complete redesign of the cooling system. Rushing this to market would be criminally negligent. I quickly took photos of the key documents with my phone, my hands shaking slightly. As I was replacing the files, I noticed another folder labeled Merger Correspondence. Inside were emails between Richard, Victoria, and various executives. One email from Victoria to Richard caught my eye. Regarding Morgan Reynolds' attendance at the wedding, I've made it clear to all partners that she is not to be included in any business discussions despite her automotive background. Her presence is a courtesy to Diane only. Keep her away from Westlake executives. She lacks the discretion and refinement necessary for these delicate negotiations. Another email, dated just 2 weeks ago. Winston land acquisition is contingent on marriage proceeding as planned. Claire remains uncertain about timeline. Jake must finalize by this weekend. Merger documentation prepared for signing Sunday morning before they depart for honeymoon. I felt sick. It seemed Claire's instincts were correct. Her marriage was indeed part of the business transaction. And Victoria had been actively working to exclude me from any involvement, despite, or perhaps because of, my relevant expertise. As I continued searching, I discovered something even more disturbing. The merger agreement included legal language that would effectively shield Bradford Industries from liability for any existing design limitations once the companies merged. They were creating a corporate structure that would make it nearly impossible to hold anyone accountable for the cooling system flaw. I was so absorbed in the documents that I almost didn't hear the approaching footsteps. I quickly replaced the folders, grabbed my wedding itinerary, and was pretending to read it when Richard entered the study. "Morgan," he said, clearly surprised to see me there. "What are you doing?" I held up the wedding folder. "Just looking for my schedule. Mom said the information would be in here." He eyed the desk, visibly checking if anything was disturbed. "Find everything you needed?" "Yes, thanks. Lots of activities planned." He nodded, still watching me carefully. "Your mother mentioned you were helping with setup earlier." "That's unnecessary. We have staff for that." "I don't mind helping. Keeps me busy." "Yes, well." He cleared his throat. "Morgan, I know we haven't always been close, but I want you to know I've followed your career with interest. Your work at Detroit Motors is quite impressive." The compliment surprised me. "Thank you, Richard. In fact, after the merger, we'll be expanding our engineering division. Someone with your expertise would be an asset to Bradford Westlake." Was he offering me a job? After 10 years of minimal contact? "I'm happy at Detroit Motors," I replied cautiously. "Think about it. Family should work together when possible." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some work to finish before the rehearsal dinner." As I left the study, my mind was racing. Richard's sudden interest in my career couldn't be coincidence. Did he suspect I'd seen the technical specifications? Was the job offer an attempt to buy my silence? Back in my room, I reviewed the photos I'd taken, analyzing the cooling system design in detail. The flaw was even worse than I'd initially thought. Under certain conditions, thermal runaway could cause catastrophic battery failure within minutes, with no warning to the driver. I was facing a serious ethical dilemma. Exposing what I knew would undoubtedly destroy my relationship with the Bradford family, tenuous as it was. My mother would be devastated. Jake's wedding would be ruined. But saying nothing could potentially put lives at risk once these vehicles hit the market. I decided to approach Richard privately after the rehearsal dinner. Despite our differences, I had to believe he wouldn't knowingly endanger people for profit. Perhaps he didn't fully understand the technical implications of the design flaw. I would explain the issues calmly and professionally, engineer to businessman, and trust that he would do the right thing. As I dressed for the rehearsal dinner, I practiced my explanation, keeping it simple but accurate. I even prepared some rough sketches showing how the cooling system could be redesigned without delaying production too significantly. I was going to give Richard the chance to be the hero of the story, to fix the problem before anyone got hurt and before any merger documents were signed. It was the right thing to do, both ethically and professionally. I just hoped he would see it that way too. The rehearsal dinner was held in the estate's formal garden, with strings of lights hanging from the trees and champagne flowing freely. I stayed in the background, watching as Jake and Claire went through the motions of celebrating their upcoming marriage while Victoria flitted between business associates and wedding guests, perfectly blending social niceties with strategic networking. Claire caught my eye across the garden and gave me a small smile. She looked beautiful but tense, nothing like the relaxed woman I'd shared lunch with earlier. Jake kept his arm around her waist possessively, guiding her from group to group like a prized acquisition. I waited patiently for an opportunity to speak with Richard privately. It came later in the evening, as guests were beginning to leave, and he stepped away to take a phone call near the garden's edge. Richard, I approached as he ended his call. Do you have a moment? There's something important I need to discuss with you. He checked his watch. Can it wait until tomorrow, Morgan? It's been a long day. It's about the e-drive system in the merger documents, I said quietly. His expression instantly sharpened. What did you say? I saw the technical specifications in the study, I admitted. The cooling system has a critical flaw that could cause catastrophic battery failure. It needs to be redesigned before production. Richard's face hardened. You had no right to look at those documents. I know, and I apologize for that, but the safety issue is real. Look, I pulled out my phone and showed him my analysis. Under these specific conditions, the batteries will overheat within minutes. There's no failsafe. This could kill people, Richard. He stared at my calculations for a long moment. How many people have you shown this to? No one. I came directly to you. This can be fixed before the merger finalizes. Put your phone away, he hissed, glancing around to ensure no one was watching us. This is proprietary information. You could be sued for corporate espionage. I'm not trying to cause problems, I insisted. I'm trying to prevent them. This design is dangerous. You don't understand the complexities of bringing a product to market, Richard replied dismissively. Every new technology has optimizations that happen post-launch. This isn't an optimization issue. It's a fundamental design flaw that could lead to vehicle fires or explosions. People could die. Your concerns are exaggerated. Our engineering team has already. What concerns? Victoria's voice cut through our conversation as she appeared beside Richard. She was smiling for the benefit of nearby guests, but her eyes were cold. Richard, Jake is looking for you. The Westlakes have some questions about tomorrow's schedule. Morgan was just leaving, Richard said firmly. I stood my ground. Victoria, the e-drive system in the merger has a serious safety issue that needs to be addressed before any agreements are signed. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I don't know how you accessed private company information, but this conversation is over. This is Jake's wedding weekend, and you will not disrupt it with unfounded allegations. They're not unfounded. I can prove the design flaw exists. You're a glorified car mechanic trying to insert yourself into matters beyond your expertise, Victoria hissed. This merger represents years of strategic planning, billions in shareholder value, hundreds of jobs. I will not let you jeopardize that with amateur analysis. I felt a presence beside me and turned to see Jake had joined us, his expression concerned. Everything okay here? Your stepsister seems to think she's qualified to critique the e-drive system, Victoria told him. Apparently helping with table arrangements wasn't enough involvement for her. Jake looked between us uncomfortably. Morgan, this isn't really the time or place. Jake, you know I'm a powertrain systems engineer. This is literally my area of expertise. The cooling system design is flawed. I appealed to him directly. You can't put this on the market as is. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jake's face, but Richard cut in. That's enough, Morgan. This is a family celebration, not a technical review meeting. I'll contact Westlake directly, I said, frustration building. They deserve to know what they're buying. Victoria's fake smile finally dropped. You will do no such thing. If you attempt to interfere with this merger, I'll make sure Detroit Motors knows exactly what kind of corporate spy they've employed. Are you threatening me? I'm protecting this family's interests. Something you clearly have no regard for. My mother appeared then, her expression pleading. Morgan, please. Not now. This is Jake's special weekend. Mom, this is serious. The e-drive system always has to be the center of attention, Victoria interrupted smoothly. Some things never change, do they, Diane? My mother looked torn, glancing between Victoria and me. Morgan, maybe this discussion could wait until after the wedding? I couldn't believe it. Even now, faced with a serious safety issue, my mother was choosing to appease Victoria rather than listen to me. The merger is being signed after the wedding, I reminded her. This can't wait. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Morgan, if you pursue this, you're not just attacking a business deal. You're attacking your family. Your mother's security depends on Bradford Industries' success. The threat was clear. My mother had no career, no savings of her own. She was completely dependent on Richard financially. Think carefully about your next move, Victoria added. Diane, take Morgan back to the house. She's had too much champagne. I've had one glass, I protested. Morgan, please, my mother begged quietly. Don't make a scene. I looked around at them, Richard calculating, Victoria triumphant, Jake uncomfortable but silent, my mother anxious and pleading. None of them cared about the truth. None of them cared about the potential harm their actions could cause. All that mattered was the merger, the money, the Bradford family reputation. Fine, I said finally. But this conversation isn't over. As my mother led me away, I caught sight of Claire watching the interaction from across the garden, concern evident on her face. At least someone seemed to recognize that something was seriously wrong. Back in the house, my mother followed me to my room. Morgan, I don't know what's gotten into you. This merger is incredibly important to Richard and Jake. More important than safety? More important than doing the right thing. You don't understand the pressure they're under, she insisted. The board, the shareholders, the market expectations. And you don't understand the technical issues I've identified, I countered. People could die, Mom. She sighed heavily. Richard wouldn't allow a dangerous product on the market. He's a good man. Is he? Because he just threatened your financial security to keep me quiet. My mother looked away. He didn't mean it that way. Yes, he did. And you know it. I sat on the edge of my bed, suddenly tired. When did you become this person, Mom? Someone who values money and status over everything else. That's not fair. I've built a life here. No, you've attached yourself to someone else's life. And you've let Victoria dictate your relationship with your own daughter for years. Her eyes filled with tears. Please, Morgan. Just get through this weekend. For me. For Jake. Don't ruin everything. As she left, I sat alone in the blue guest room, weighing my options. I could stay silent, attend the wedding tomorrow, and fly home Sunday knowing I'd done nothing as a potentially deadly design went into production. Or I could act, knowing it would likely sever my relationship with the Bradfords permanently and possibly hurt my mother financially. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself had been paid to cooperate with Victoria's perfect event. I dressed in my navy blue cocktail dress, appropriate but not attention-grabbing, and made my way to the garden where chairs had been arranged for the ceremony. Despite everything, part of me still hoped for a last-minute resolution. Perhaps Richard had reconsidered overnight. Perhaps he'd realized the liability issues and decided to address the design flaw before finalizing the merger. Those hopes were dashed when I overheard him speaking with the Westlake CEO before the ceremony. All documents are prepared for signing tomorrow morning, Richard was saying. The lawyers have reviewed everything. It should be smooth sailing. Excellent, the CEO replied. The board is very pleased with the eDrive acquisition. The market potential is enormous. They knew. They all knew. and they were proceeding anyway. As I took my seat for the ceremony, resolve hardened within me. Victoria had called me just the mechanic once too often. She was about to learn that sometimes the mechanic is exactly the person you should have listened to. The wedding ceremony itself was picture perfect, exactly as Victoria had orchestrated. White roses adorned every surface, a string quartet played softly, and the weather remained ideal as Jake and Claire exchanged vows beneath an elaborate floral arch. If you didn't know the undercurrents of business and family tension, you'd think it was a fairy tale wedding. I watched Claire carefully during the ceremony. She recited her vows clearly, but without the emotional glow most brides exhibit. Jake, for his part, seemed more relieved than joyful, as if completing a particularly challenging business objective. Throughout the ceremony, I sat in my assigned seat in the back row, far from the immediate family. My mother occasionally glanced back at me nervously, while Victoria pretended I didn't exist. The seating arrangement told its own story. Bradford family members and Westlake executives occupied the front rows, with the Winston family, Claire's relatives, given prominent but slightly secondary positioning. After the ceremony, guests moved to the grand tent for the reception. My place card, as expected, seated me at a table far from the family, with distant acquaintances and business associates deemed too unimportant for better placement, but too important to exclude entirely. I watched as Richard, Victoria, and Jake worked the room with practiced efficiency. They moved from table to table, but it wasn't random socializing. They were systematically engaging with Westlake executives and board members, cementing relationships and discussing business even at this supposedly personal celebration. Claire was left to entertain her own family members, looking increasingly isolated in her designer wedding gown. When she caught my eye across the room, I gave her a sympathetic smile. She made her way over to my table during a lull in the formalities. "Morgan, are you okay? That looked intense last night with Victoria and Richard." "I'm fine," I assured her. "But I'm worried about some business decisions they're making." She lowered her voice. Jake was upset afterward. He wouldn't tell me details, but he said you'd raised concerns about the e-drive system. I did. There's a serious safety issue they're ignoring. Claire looked troubled. Jake respects your technical knowledge. He's mentioned it before. But he's under tremendous pressure from his father and Victoria. I understand pressure, but this is about doing the right thing. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Before I could answer, Victoria materialized beside us, champagne flute in hand. "Claire, darling, your father is looking for you. Something about a toast he wants to make." Claire hesitated, then squeezed my hand before departing. Victoria remained, studying me with cold calculation. "I hope you're enjoying the celebration, Morgan. So kind of you to join us, despite your professional commitments." "It's a beautiful wedding," I replied neutrally. "Claire seems lovely." "She is. Perfect for Jake and for Bradford Industries." Victoria sipped her champagne. "You know, Morgan, life is so much easier when people understand their proper roles. Claire understands hers. I do wish you'd learn yours." "And what role would that be, Victoria?" "The distant stepsister who visits occasionally and doesn't interfere with family business." She smiled thinly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to introduce the Westlake CEO to some of our investors." As she walked away, I noticed several Westlake executives gathered near the bar, including CEO Howard Westlake himself. This was my opportunity. I straightened my dress, took a deep breath, and approached them with confidence. "Mr. Westlake," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Morgan Reynolds, Senior Powertrain Systems Engineer at Detroit Motors." He shook my hand, looking slightly confused. "Ms. Reynolds, are you a friend of the bride?" "I'm Jake's stepsister, actually. But I specialize in electric vehicle systems, particularly battery thermal management." I spoke clearly and professionally, the way I would at any industry conference. "I understand the eDrive platform is central to your merger with Bradford Industries." His interest visibly increased. "It is indeed. A revolutionary technology, from what our technical team tells me. The concept is promising, I agreed, choosing my words carefully. The integration of power delivery and thermal management is particularly innovative. You're familiar with the design? He asked, eyebrows raising. I've reviewed similar approaches in my work. The challenge is always balancing power density with thermal stability, especially in rapid charging scenarios. Howard nodded thoughtfully. That's been a focus of discussion. The Bradford team assures us they've solved those challenges. Have they discussed their cooling system architecture with you? Particularly the isolation between the primary and secondary cooling loops. A slight frown crossed his face. In general terms, yes. Why do you ask? I'd be interested to hear how they're handling thermal expansion during rapid discharge cycles. In my experience, that's where similar designs have encountered issues. Another Westlake executive joined the conversation. That's actually come up in our technical review. The Bradford team suggested it was a non-issue with their proprietary architecture. I smiled professionally. Perhaps they've developed something revolutionary. Though in my experience, the laws of thermodynamics tend to be rather inflexible. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Victoria notice our conversation. Her face paled as she registered who I was speaking with. She began moving toward us with alarming speed, Richard in tow. Morgan. Victoria's voice was artificially bright as she approached. I see you've met Howard. Howard, I hope Morgan isn't boring you with technical details on Jake's special day. Howard looked between us, sensing the tension. Not at all. Ms. Reynolds was sharing some interesting perspectives on electric vehicle thermal management. How delightful, Victoria said through a frozen smile. Morgan has always been enthusiastic about cars. She's just the mechanic in our family. We keep her around for when things break. The dismissive joke fell flat. Howard's expression cooled noticeably. Ms. Reynolds indicated she's a senior engineer at Detroit Motors, specializing in powertrain systems, he said. Hardly, just a mechanic. Victoria's smile tightened. A figure of speech, of course. Morgan, I believe your mother was looking for you. Actually, Howard said, I'd like to continue this conversation. Ms. Reynolds raised some interesting questions about the eDrive cooling system that I'd like to explore further. Richard stepped forward. Perhaps we could schedule a technical discussion after the wedding festivities, Howard. This hardly seems the appropriate venue. On the contrary, Howard replied, given that we're signing merger documents tomorrow morning, this seems exactly the right time to address any technical concerns. He turned to me. Ms. Reynolds, would you mind being more specific about your questions? This was my moment. I could see Victoria and Richard exchanging panicked glances, but they couldn't stop me without creating exactly the scene they were trying to avoid. I'd be happy to, I said calmly. The current eDrive design uses a cascading cooling system that's inadequate for the battery configuration. Under rapid charging followed by high acceleration, the primary cooling loop will experience catastrophic failure within approximately 7 minutes. Howard's expression grew serious. Are you certain of this? I've analyzed the thermal dynamics. The failure point is mathematically inevitable unless the entire cooling architecture is redesigned. Richard attempted to intervene. Morgan is speculating based on incomplete information. Actually, I interrupted. I reviewed the complete technical specifications yesterday. The design flaw is documented in your own materials, flagged for post-merger optimization, which I believe translates to fix it after the deal is done. The atmosphere had changed dramatically. Several other Westlake executives had gathered around us, and I could see Jake approaching with concern on his face. Howard, Richard said urgently, I assure you any technical concerns will be addressed. I'd like to see this analysis, Howard cut in. If what Ms. Reynolds is suggesting is accurate, we have a serious problem. Victoria was livid but maintaining a brittle social veneer. This is Jake's wedding reception. Surely this discussion can wait until tomorrow. A discussion about a potentially fatal design flaw in the centerpiece technology of a $600 million merger? Howard replied coolly. No, Victoria, I don't believe it can wait. Jake had reached us now with Claire close behind. What's happening? He asked, looking between us all. Howard turned to him. Your stepsister has raised significant safety concerns about the e-drive system. Concerns that apparently your team was aware of but chose not to disclose to us. Jake looked at me, then at his father. The cooling system issue? I told you we needed to address that before proceeding. Richard's face flushed with anger. Jake, not now. When, Dad? After the papers are signed? After cars start catching fire? Jake turned to Howard. Morgan is right. The cooling system needs to be redesigned. I flagged this months ago, but was overruled. Victoria looked as if she might spontaneously combust. Jake, this is your wedding day. Your future with this company is meaningless if we knowingly release an unsafe product, Jake finished firmly. I was shocked. I hadn't expected Jake to back me up, especially not publicly in the middle of his own wedding reception. Howard Westlake surveyed the family drama unfolding before him with growing concern. I think we need to pause here. Clearly, there are internal issues at Bradford Industries that need to be resolved before we proceed with any merger. He turned to me. Ms. Reynolds, would you be willing to walk our technical team through your concerns in detail? Of course, I replied. Howard, please, Victoria attempted, her social mask cracking. Morgan is not even part of Bradford Industries. She has no authority. But she does have expertise, Howard interrupted. Expertise that appears relevant to a $500 million investment my company is about to make. He nodded to his colleagues. Gentlemen, ladies, I believe we need to reconvene. As the Westlake contingent moved away for an impromptu conference, Victoria rounded on me. You've ruined everything, she hissed. Years of work, destroyed in minutes. I didn't destroy anything, I replied calmly. I prevented a potential disaster. If those vehicles had gone to market with that cooling system, people could have died. You had no right to interfere, Richard growled. Actually, I had every right. As an engineer, I have an ethical obligation to speak up when I see a design that could endanger lives. Claire stepped forward, placing herself slightly between me and Victoria. I think Morgan did the right thing. And clearly Jake agrees. Jake nodded, his arm around Claire. I do. Dad, I tried to tell you the system wasn't ready. This isn't Morgan's fault. Victoria couldn't believe what she was hearing. Jake, she's deliberately sabotaged this merger on your wedding day. No, Jake replied firmly. She's prevented us from making a catastrophic mistake, both ethically and legally. If those cars had failed after we knowingly concealed the defect, we'd be facing criminal charges, not just civil liability. As the argument continued, Howard Westlake returned. In light of these revelations, we're suspending merger negotiations pending a complete technical review of the e-drive system. Victoria looked as if she might faint. Richard's face had gone from red to ashen. However, Howard continued, glancing at me, we remain interested in the underlying technology. Ms. Reynolds, if you'd be willing to consult on the redesign of the cooling system, Westlake would be grateful for your expertise. Before I could respond, my mother appeared at my side, having finally gathered the courage to approach. I'm proud of you, Morgan, she said quietly. Your father would be too. It was the first time in years she'd mentioned my father, and the first time in even longer that she'd stood with me instead of deferring to Victoria. The simple statement meant more than she could know. As the reception continued around us, its celebratory mood now tinged with tension and whispered conversations, I realized that Victoria had been right about one thing. I was indeed just the mechanic in this family. But sometimes, the mechanic is exactly the person who prevents a catastrophic breakdown. The days following Jake and Claire's wedding were chaotic, to put it mildly. The Westlake-Bradford merger was officially suspended pending a complete technical review, sending shockwaves through both companies and the automotive industry at large. Business news outlets speculated wildly about what had happened, with headlines ranging from Bradford-Westlake merger hits technical snag to safety concerns derail $600 million automotive deal. I extended my stay in Michigan by a week, working directly with Westlake's engineering team to explain the cooling system flaws in detail. Howard Westlake had arranged for a conference room at their headquarters where I walked their technical staff through my analysis. Their chief engineer, a veteran in the industry, confirmed my findings within hours. This would have been catastrophic, he told Howard. Morgan's assessment is spot on. We're looking at complete thermal runaway in certain operating conditions. Jake surprised me by joining these technical sessions, taking responsibility in a way I hadn't expected from him. I knew something wasn't right with the system, he admitted during one meeting. But I let myself be convinced that we could fix it after the merger. That was wrong, and I'm grateful Morgan had the courage to speak up when I didn't. This new side of Jake, thoughtful, accountable, and genuinely concerned with doing the right thing, was a revelation. We began having actual conversations for the first time in our lives, finding common ground in our shared concern for the company's future and the safety of its products. I never really knew you, he told me over coffee one afternoon. Victoria always painted you as this resentful outsider who didn't understand our world. But you understand the most important part of it better than any of us. The engineering? I asked. The integrity, he corrected. Dad and Victoria got so focused on stock prices and market share that they lost sight of what matters. You never did. Claire also reached out, inviting me to lunch away from the Bradford estate. Their honeymoon had been postponed due to the merger crisis, but she seemed relieved rather than disappointed. You gave us an unexpected wedding gift, she said. Jake is finally standing up for himself against Victoria and Richard. He's talking about restructuring the company's leadership. How are you handling all this? I asked her. Honestly, I'm proud of him. And I'm glad to know my husband isn't willing to cut corners on safety for profit. She smiled. Plus, I like you, Morgan. I'm hoping we might actually become real family now. The situation with Richard and Victoria was less positive, as expected. Richard vacillated between fury and desperate damage control, while Victoria simply refused to speak to me at all. My mother was caught in the middle, torn between her husband and her daughter. A week after the wedding, she came to my hotel room, looking exhausted but determined. I've spent 10 years being Victoria's shadow, she said without preamble. Letting her dictate how I should dress, who I should talk to, even how I should interact with my own daughter. She took a deep breath. I'm done with that. What does that mean, Mom? It means I've told Richard that either Victoria's influence over our family changes or our marriage does. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. I should have stood up for you years ago, Morgan. I'm so sorry I didn't. I hugged her tightly, feeling a knot of long-held tension finally begin to unravel. It's never too late to start. As for Bradford Industries, the company faced a critical juncture. With the merger suspended and serious questions raised about its technical oversight, stock prices plummeted. Richard was facing pressure from the board to step down, and rumors swirled about potential shareholder lawsuits. Ironically, it was Jake who approached me with a potential solution. We need to completely redesign the e-drive cooling system, he said. But our engineering team doesn't have the expertise to do it quickly enough to save the company. Would you consider consulting on the project? You want me to help save Bradford Industries? I asked incredulously. After everything that's happened? I'm not asking for Victoria or my father, Jake clarified. I'm asking for the hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with this decision. And I'm asking because you're the best person for the job. I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with Bradford Industries and its toxic family dynamics. But another part, the engineer, the problem solver, was already mentally redesigning that cooling system. I'll consult, I finally agreed. But I won't become a Bradford employee. I'll work through Detroit Motors as an external contractor. Jake nodded. That's fair. And Morgan? Thank you. Over the next month, I split my time between Detroit Motors and Bradford Industries, leading a team to completely rebuild the eDrive cooling architecture. The new design incorporated redundant safety systems and fail-safes that would prevent catastrophic failures even under extreme conditions. Howard Westlake remained interested in the technology, visiting several times to review our progress. Once we're confident in the safety systems, he told me, we'd be open to revisiting partnership discussions, though perhaps not a full merger. Richard, facing the reality that his company's survival now depended on the stepdaughter he'd dismissed for years, swallowed his pride and largely stayed out of my way. Victoria was less adaptable, making her displeasure known whenever our paths crossed. "Enjoying your moment of triumph?" she asked acidly when she encountered me in the Bradford Industries lobby one afternoon. "This isn't about triumph, Victoria. It's about fixing a dangerous design before anyone gets hurt." "So noble," she scoffed. "Don't think this changes anything. You'll always be the mechanic's daughter playing at being an executive." I smiled. "You know what, Victoria? I am my father's daughter. He taught me to fix things properly the first time, to take pride in my work, and to never cut corners when safety is on the line. If that makes me just a mechanic in your eyes, I'll wear that title proudly." 3 months after Jake's wedding, Bradford Industries unveiled the redesigned eDrive system to industry analysts. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive, with several experts highlighting the innovative safety features as setting a new standard for the industry. Jake, who had stepped up as the new public face of the company while Richard took a less visible role, made a point of crediting me publicly during the presentation. The breakthrough cooling architecture was developed under the leadership of Morgan Reynolds, one of the industry's foremost powertrain systems engineers, and, I'm proud to say, my sister. Not stepsister. Sister. I declined Richard's subsequent offer of a permanent executive position at Bradford Industries. My life and career were in Detroit, where I had built my reputation on my own terms. But I did agree to remain as a technical advisor, consulting on new electric vehicle platforms. My mother followed through on her promise to assert her independence from Victoria's influence. She began spending more time in Detroit, getting to know my world instead of always expecting me to fit into hers. We were rebuilding our relationship slowly, one honest conversation at a time. As for Jake and Claire, they finally took their postponed honeymoon 6 months after the wedding. Before leaving, Jake informed the family that upon their return, they would be moving to their own home rather than living on the Bradford estate. Victoria nearly imploded, my mother reported with barely suppressed amusement. She's losing her grip on the family one person at a time. A year after the wedding that almost destroyed a family business, I received an Industry Innovation Award for the eDrive cooling system design. Jake, Claire, and my mother sat in the audience as I accepted it. Victoria and Richard declined to attend. Standing at the podium, looking out at my small but genuine family, I reflected on everything that had happened since that moment in the garden when Victoria had dismissed me as just the mechanic. In engineering, as in life, the most catastrophic failures often begin with the smallest oversights, I told the audience. A loose connection. A miscalculation. A voice ignored because it doesn't come from the expected source. But integrity and expertise can't be measured by titles or family connections. Sometimes, the person you need most is the one you've been taught to overlook. After the ceremony, my mother hugged me tightly. "Your father would be bursting with pride," she whispered. For the first time in years, hearing her mention him didn't sting. "I think he would," I agreed. As we left the venue, Jake pulled me aside. "You know, if Victoria hadn't called you, just the mechanic, that day, none of this would have happened. Bradford Industries might have collapsed under lawsuits after the first eDrive failures. So in a way, we should thank her?" I laughed. "I wouldn't go that far," Jake grinned. "But it does show that sometimes the best thing that can happen is having someone underestimate you completely." He was right. Victoria's dismissive words had been the final push I needed to stop seeking approval I would never receive and start using my voice for what really mattered. In trying to diminish me, she had inadvertently empowered me to take my rightful place at the table. The lesson wasn't lost on me. Our worth isn't determined by how others see us, but by how we see ourselves and the courage we show when faced with difficult choices. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. It gives you the element of surprise when you finally show your true capabilities. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or called just anything, remember my story. Your knowledge, your skills, your integrity, these are powerful tools that no one can take from you. Use them wisely, speak up when it matters, and never let anyone else define your value. Have you ever been underestimated and then proved someone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing your ground. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes being just the mechanic means you're exactly the person who can prevent a disaster.